Hey drawing guys, since I'm going to be gone for the beginning of this assignment, I have created a video reference. Unlike single point perspective, which begins with a point, two-point perspective begins with a line, a horizon line. Then you add 2 points to that line. These are your two vanishing points. In single point perspective, objects present a face toward the viewer, but in two-point perspective, they present an edge toward the viewer. So the leading edge of a prominent object is a good place to start. Once you have this initial edge placed, you can draw the edges that will define the faces of the object. Remember that in two-point perspective, all non-vertical lines will converge on one of the two vanishing points you've placed. Edges of a rectangular prism that appear to converge toward the vanishing points create the illusion of depth and connect to the leading vertical edge of that prism. To make objects appear to sit on the same surface, make sure that their base edges line up. As objects are layered over or under one another, the illusion of depth increases. I'm not going to make you sit through watching a completed project, even in time-lapse, but in this example of a street corner, I'll add a few details, a street sign and a door front, just to give the drawing some interest. I want this front building to have multiple floors, so I'm going to divide up the length of the front edge. Since there's no perspective effect on vertical distances along a single line in two-point perspective, I can do this with standard ruled measurements. Then I make the divisions along the faces of the building by drawing lines from my measurements that converge on my vanishing points. I want to subdivide each face of this building vertically into 4 equal sections to suggest a glass and steel look. In order to do this, I need to find the perspective center of the face and then subdivide that again. I can accomplish this by drawing in the diagonals of a section of the building. Where those diagonals cross is the center, in perspective, of the face. Then I draw in a vertical line and I can subdivide each new half of the face and repeat the process. I want to put a little smokestack on top of my building. For this, I'll need to build a cylinder. In order to place my cylinder, I'm going to need to do a little bit of basic geometry. I'm going to place a square above my building. Remember that the appearance of a square will change given how high it is above the horizon line and how far to the right or left it is. Make sure you get a pretty convincing square placed first. The reason that we start with a square is that we can inscribe a circle in a square such that the circle touches the center of each side of the square. In the upper right, I've drawn this figure as if we were looking at the base of the cylinder from directly below. If I draw the diagonals of the square, we can see that the circle intersects these diagonals at about 3/4 of the way out from the center. Here I've drawn the diagonals of the square in perspective. I can find the centers in perspective of each side of my square by drawing a line from each vanishing point through the center of the square. Then I can find reference points for my circle by estimating 3/4 of the way out from the center along each diagonal and making a mark. I now have 8 reference points for the end of my cylinder in perspective. Now drawing a convincing cylinder is a simple matter of connecting the points with an appropriate curve. I work each section of the curve separately until I've gone all the way around. At this point, all I have to do is erase my reference lines and clean up my edges. Since I'm looking up at this cylinder, I can't see its top, so I don't need the back side of the curve. Now that I have my basic structures in place, I can add life to the drawing by adding details, shading, and populating it with little people. Remember that in two-point perspective, all straight lines will either be vertical or will converge on one of the two vanishing points. Small cylinders in these drawings can probably be fudged, but big ones need to be measured out, using the method I just showed you. Divisions based on 1/2 can be created using the method I showed you earlier. And remember that objects that cross the horizon line will only show 2 faces, while objects that sit entirely above or entirely below the horizon line will have 3. So here's your assignment. You're going to create a scene of a busy street corner in two-point perspective. You must include 5 buildings of various sizes, 2 properly measured cylinders, 2 rectangular prism-type objects that exist either entirely below or entirely above the horizon line, and any other interesting features you choose. Once you've got these things placed, you can add details, shading, and so on, and then it's time to populate your street corner. This little project is due next Friday, November 17th. Good luck!